The reading this morning will be taken from the book of Genesis. We'll be reading from chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. This passage focuses on the fall of man. Genesis 3, 1 through 12. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." "You will not surely die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" The man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it."
For today and the next 2 Sundays, we're going to be kind of combining our thoughts together. We're about to roll out a new program. Some people have been working on it for some time, and we're going to be sharing that with you over the next couple of weeks. And I want to kind of set the stage this morning by talking about this story. And I want to look at it in terms of what we think of, and what you're going to be hearing a lot about is the expression hurts, habits, and hang-ups. Now, as you look at the story here of Adam and Eve, and we're not going to spend a lot of time with the details of the story. Most of us pretty well know that story very, very well, about the temptation, God putting Adam and Eve in the garden, telling them not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and Satan coming along and saying, well, actually, you're not going to die. God knows that if you eat that, you're going to be like him. I think there's kind of the temptation, isn't it? To be like God. And so they disobey God, which is what the word sin means. And as they have eaten of the fruit, you notice what it says here is that they come to a realization. And that realization is that they have done something wrong. But there's a whole lot more that begins to come to their understanding. It says their eyes were open. We kind of talk about this in terms of what's called being self-aware. That from a stage of innocence and purity, they now are beginning to realize the implications of things. And as they realize those implications, they realize they're naked. Whoa. We don't have any clothes on. You know, it's funny, before they ate of the fruit, they didn't have that concept. They were, in their simplicity, completely innocent. And there was nothing wrong with that. And so, from their shame, you know, what happens when people are ashamed? Well, they start trying to cover, and so they realize they don't have any clothes. They begin to try to cover up. They make some clothes for themselves out of the leaves. And now they're experiencing something for the first time that they've never had. It's guilt. And as we're talking about this, these words should be ringing kind of echoing with us because they're part of the experience that we have as human beings, isn't it? We know the experience of being self-aware, of feeling shame and guilt. I have a tendency, sometimes, I have a very strong conscience. And I think it probably came about when I was a toddler and my dad was stationed, with the military, with the Navy, on the island of Guam in the Pacific. It was less than a decade from the end of World War II. And so military families, when they came to stay on the base, didn't stay in typical housing. We lived in a Quonset hut. Those are those things that they make. They go up pretty simply. They're kind of half circular shaped. They have a great big high ceiling. And so what they would do is they would just put walls in there, and I'm guessing they must have been about 7 feet high. And these walls would not go all the way up the top. They'd just be kind of a barrier in the room. And Mom left me in the room, and she would run into another room, and so to check on me, she would get up on a chair and look over the wall. And then I would hear the voice of God, which sounded a lot like my mother, that said, "Wayne, I told you not to touch that." And so that imprinted on me, very strongly, that sense of conscience, of guilt, of somebody being aware of somebody watching what I was doing. And the account says then the result was that they were afraid. They're hurting. Now think about this. They have had this wonderful relationship with God in the garden, and now, as they have eaten of this fruit, and as they have become aware, they want to hide from their Creator. They're ashamed. They're hurting. And they don't think they can turn to Him and find help. One of the things that the Bible tells us, we know from Romans 3, for example, all have sinned, fallen short of the glory of God, that none of us is perfect. And so we live with feelings of fear and guilt. Fear maybe because of punishment or because of conscience, or maybe because that somebody will discover and will be exposed, that emotionally we feel just as naked as Adam and Eve did in the garden. There are things that we're ashamed of, that we're embarrassed by, but things that are troubling our lives. We experience shame, humiliation, and embarrassment. We're afraid that somebody might know. We have sadness, disappointment. We fear that we're letting God down or other people or ourselves. You probably realize that we're talking more than just even about the idea of sin. That there are things in our lives that we're not proud of. There are things in our lives that create distress. The way we react is to hide, to have a secret. That's one of the things that most of us, and it would be really interesting, I won't do this, but it would be really interesting to ask how many people have things in their lives right now that are bothering you, that are troubling you, that are frustrating you, that are hurting you, and you are trying to keep it completely secret. Because you're afraid that if anybody else knew about that, they wouldn't like you. Well, this is what we mean when we use that expression, hurts, habits, and hang-ups. So let's kind of take a bit of a definition here. All right, what do we mean by hurts? Well, it's been described that hurts are any life experience that may have damaged your heart. We're not talking physically, are we? We're talking about those things that we may have done or may have been done to us. It's an emotional reaction to another person's behavior or disturbing situation. But we carry those with us through our lives. We don't know how to put those down, set them away. Okay, examples of this: abandonment, abortion, abuse, betrayal, neglect, rape, rejection. You probably can think of a number of hurts that you are experiencing or have experienced. Habits, kind of self-explanatory, isn't it? Unhealthy patterns that often start as a perceived remedy for some problem in your life, but end up turning into a chronic bad behavior or addiction. Again, examples: alcohol, drugs. How about bitterness, abusive behavior, affairs, critical spirit, eating disorders, gambling, gossip, lying, unforgiveness, workaholism, and the list could go on from there. Or hang-ups. Negative mental attitudes that are used to cope with adversity. I think we kind of know and identify with that. Examples: anger, anxiety, worry, arrogance, body image problems, bullying, bigotry, codependency, control freaks, depression, fear, frigidity, greed, envy, guilt, impatience, laziness, materialism, perfectionism, pride, racism, self-righteousness. I'm glad that the source that I was using for the material included that self-righteousness, because, it's so easy for us to think, well, I don't have any of those. I am perfect. But we're not, are we? And sometimes that self-righteousness turns to an overcritical attitude of other people, being harsh, judgmental, unfair. So as we think about the idea of hurts, habits, and hang-ups, and the fact that none of us is perfect and we're all struggling with different things, and often we're doing it silently and trying to figure out a way to find a solution to our problems, how can you deal with them? I want to give you an illustration that I've always liked. I learned it many years ago, but I think it's a really effective way to kind of realize it. I just lost a background, okay? There was supposed to be a picture of a beach ball here. Now, I'd like you to imagine that you've gotten a nice beach ball. And you've gone out in the water with that beach ball. How long can you hold that beach ball underwater? Now, some of you are thinking, well, I got a beach ball about this big, so I can just hold it under there and down. Normal-sized beach ball. Sometimes it's hard enough just to get it under the water, isn't it? But then to try to hold it under there for any length of time. I remember one time when I, was young and I was trying to put a beach ball underwater, I sat on it. And I ended up floating on top of the water with the beach ball under me until it finally, I couldn't stay on it any longer. You can't keep a beach ball underwater. And the workshop that I had gone to, where the university professor who was talking about this, was making the point, is this was a crisis counseling workshop, and he was saying, this is what happens to us with our problems. Is we try to hold the beach ball underwater, and just try to imagine that you're holding that underwater, and what's happening? Your muscles start getting tired. And if you got really determined, You might be able to hold it down, but the muscles get tired, you start cramping a little bit, and eventually that beach ball is going to come up. Can't keep it from happening. And that's the reality of our hurts, our habits, and our hang-ups. Is we can't hold them under, we can't keep them secret, we can't just kind of ignore them. And so he said, you can either wait until it, and when you've been holding it underwater and you can't hold it anymore, it just explodes up out of the water. Or you can choose to slowly, in a controlled way, let it up. My beach ball appeared. Oh. So, when we talk about recovery, when we talk about overcoming these things and saying, okay, I want to let this up slowly, in a controlled, careful way, because I don't want it to explode and all of the problems that may create. All right, well, obviously, number one is going to be prayer, right? And I'm sure right now that whatever it is that you may be dealing with, that you are praying about it a lot. But one of the things is to accept the fact that no one is perfect. I've had a song going through my head for the last few weeks as I've been thinking about this, that it was with a whole bunch of songs we got years ago, and I never learned the song, and I'm thinking I wish that I had, because it goes with the first line begins with, no one of us has it all together. We may see people that seem to, but we don't. Denial and secrecy are part of the problem. See, when Adam and Eve hid, that was not a solution. And that wasn't really an escape or a way of avoiding, was it? Part of the problem is we compare ourselves with others. We look at somebody who says, oh man, that person has got it so perfect. I wish I were like them. Well, you know what? Just because we don't see the problems doesn't mean they don't exist. But sometimes people that we may respect the most may be nursing some of the greatest hurts and living with pain and frustration. But the key is not to try to do it alone. There's a proverb uses the statement that a cord of three strands is not easily broken. And the idea of it is that when I'm just by myself, I'm just one strand. And you take a piece of string, and it's pretty easy to break it. But you take and cord three braid three together, they're strong. And it's much harder to do that we need to have relationships with other people that we can do that with. And so the idea is to get help from others in a secure and a safe place. And so what we're going to be rolling out is a program that's called Celebrate Recovery. And I just lost another thing. The Celebrate Recovery program is intended to be a place where we can work out. It's called a Christ-centered recovery program for any hurt, hang-up, or habit.